Hi, my name is Darren. I am the co-founder of Passion for Performance, and we are the leading e-assessment and e-portfolio platform in Africa. And basically, what we do, which is what I'll be talking about in today's session, is the digital assessment of learning. So we work with clients and training providers, professional bodies, recruitment agents, internal mobility partners to help digitize the assessment process of a learner or of an applicant or of a recruitee or CPD person. What we've come to learn is that this requires an ecosystem. And so today, what I'm going to talk through is the digital ecosystem that we have distilled and decoded. And hopefully you can find some value, and please feel free to give us a shout if you have any questions. So first of all, what is an ecosystem? And pretty simply, an ecosystem is a place where all the different parts work together and to make it work well, the system work well. When an ecosystem is out of sync, then we have problems. So pollution, that kind of stuff is taking the natural ecosystem and putting it out of sync. In the digital space, here are some examples, some of the bigger players. So an ecosystem is joining all the different technologies to be able to talk together so that there is a central point. That's why Samsung has the different technologies and stuff that they use in their ecosystem. Apple has theirs, Amazon has theirs. And literally, it's making all the components talk well together. And this is one of the challenges that we have, and the reason why Samsung doesn't necessarily talk well to Apple, and Apple doesn't necessarily talk well to Microsoft or Amazon. And when I say talk well, I mean as if you have an iPhone and a Samsung tablet, or an Amazon TV, and you have to get apps and everything to get them talking together, because the difficulty is they are outside of each other's ecosystems, and it is becoming closer and closer together. But it is that's part of the challenge that we're trying to solve. And this is basically what an ecosystem is. So from a digital perspective on the assessment front line, there are a lot of players that are involved, and I'll come to those in a moment. Okay, so why is there a need, or why an assessment digital ecosystem? So we've been doing this, I've been in this space in the assessment side of learning for about 8 or 9 years now. And what I've come to realize is training providers and companies have a focus. So training providers want to get content out. Recruitment agents want to get the right candidate to the clients. CPD points want the information to do the CPD. Designation awards want specific criteria for the designation. And so all these different players have a different reason for going digital. And what they do is they forget about the ecosystem. So they focus on one aspect of the process. So let's take, for example, Zoom. When everybody started doing meetings on Zoom, who was trained on how to use Zoom? Like which company sat their employees down and said, "You're about to use Zoom, let us teach you how to use it"? Very few. The solution was the technology. Guys, here's Zoom, use Zoom, bang. And everybody was expected to use it. Now, Zoom also has an ecosystem. And the companies where their employees use Zoom or Teams or any of the platforms as well, is they started providing for the ecosystem. Most technologies have a call center of some kind, or technology companies have a call center, contact center of some kind. Why? Because they're a part of the digital ecosystem. How many training providers that or contact or professional bodies or any of those different recruitment agents have a contact center that is attached to assist you in using the technology? But yet the big players all have those because it's part of the ecosystem. And assessment is no different. Assessment of learning, it's got an ecosystem around it that needs to be applied in order to have a successful assessment process for the end user or the learner. Okay, so I'm going to set some context in terms of assessment, and then I'll go into the digital ecosystem in more detail. So when is assessment needed? Well, in the education space, assessment is needed when there's a qualification or a part qualification or a short course that needs to be given to somebody. So a learner needs those or wants to achieve those credits, unit standards, RPL. When that's the case in the education space, that needs an assessment. When you are in business, competencies, recruitment promotions, performance reviews are all assessments that take place. So that 3 month or 6 month probationary period that people kind of shy away from, it's actually not that difficult. And if you look at the process I'm about to offer to you and apply it to these places, they become incredibly valuable because they all require assessment. And we'll talk about that in a moment. The other place where assessment is needed is professional body space. So that is in providing designations and reviewing continuous professional development. So, a lot of professional bodies use professional CPD and they go, oh, just attend a training course or just go to a conference and send us proof that you went to the conference. So that in and of itself is an assessment because they want the evidence that you went to the conference, but it doesn't show that you can apply the skill. So these are kind of three different places where assessment is required. Okay, so what is the context? Well, we are assessing three things. You have cognitive skills, which is your head, knowledge-based stuff. And this is where education mostly does. It goes, yeah, write an exam, well done, you've passed. It puts you in front of some kind of a tutoring technology. It puts you in an exam venue with 100 other people and invigilators are walking around and you're writing your exam. And situationally, this is only effective for the head because it measures your prefrontal cortex, lobe, which is your short-term memory. And that is just to retain short bits of information so that you know how to pass. The other part of competence is your interpersonal skills. And this is your heart. This is your desire. This is where psychometric assessments become incredibly valuable. So a psychometric assessment can tell you whether you fit the job, but it can't tell you if you know what to do in the job. It just says whether you're fit. Very powerful, but limited. The last one is a hand, your psychomotor skills. This is you actually doing the job. Now, a written exam cannot tell you whether the learner, the person who wrote the exam, can actually physically do the job. It can only tell you if they know what to do in the job. Interpersonal or psychometric or psychomotor skills, psychometric skills, let's get it right, psychometric, interpersonal skills, can't tell you whether the person can actually physically do the job. It can tell you if they're going to be a good fit for the job. So it can tell you they'd be really good, they should have the ability to, but it can't physically tell you that you can physically do the job. So that's the context within the concept of competence. And all three of these require different types of assessment. Okay, now, when we talk about types of assessment, these are the different reasons or types of assessment that you can roll out. So you have your diagnostic or RPL. It's very interesting. I find that people don't those two together. Diagnostic is what we do to diagnose if you have a problem. RPL is what we do if we want to know if you need training. So it's the same thing. Whether you call it diagnostic or RPL, it's the same thing. And this is the assessment for learning. When you conduct this type of assessment, it will show you the gap of the person taking it and what learning they need to go on. Assessment for learning. You have a formative assessment. This is the assessment that takes place during the learning process. It's assessing your forming knowledge, your forming skills. So this is assessment as learning. In my experience, this shouldn't be credit-based and shouldn't be really linked to summatives, which I'll speak about in a moment, because this is about where the learner can make mistakes. It's about where the growth happens. It's about where they are exploring the new content and the new ways of doing things. And simulations are great here. VR becomes very valuable in some cases here because the learner gets to play. And especially in dangerous environments, VR becomes incredibly valuable here. But again, it's assessment as learning. Then you have your summative assessment. So your summative assessment is the post-assessment. It happens after the training. This is when the learner goes and does the entire task from start to finish unaided by themselves. And they are not stopped in the process for coaching or guidance. They are left to do the task. Of course, unless it's dangerous. When you do summative assessment, it's the assessment of learning. It's what have I taken from the learning space. And then there's the final one, which is the post-assessment, which is the assessment from learning. And these are where the learners do self-assessments on how they feel their learning went. Was the assessment process fair? Was the content delivered well? This is where the assessors look back and go, how was the batch of learners together? Did it work well? So when your recruitment agents look at the past 10 recruitees that they've placed and do an analysis of how it's gone, what have they learned from the process? So in the context of assessment, where you've got head, heart, and hand, you look at these types of assessment: diagnostic, RPL, formative, summative, and post-assessment, and the head, heart, and hand fit into these in different areas. And this is what the context of assessment is. And because this is the context of assessment, we need a digital ecosystem to enable this. Okay, now, what do you use for assessment? The answer is very simple. You use a portfolio of evidence. A portfolio of evidence. This is not some big thought out CETA plan to confuse everybody. And, artists have been using this for years. They put their art into a big zip up folder and take it as a portfolio. And apprentices have been, doing the task for years as part of a portfolio. This is the crux. A portfolio of evidence is a collection of items that demonstrate that you can use your head, heart, and hand to do the diagnostic or RPL, or that you can do formatives, summatives, and post-engagements, post-assessments. A portfolio of evidence consists of many different types of evidence. So you can use video, like I'm videoing now. I could use this presentation if I wanted to as part of my portfolio of evidence. Video is incredibly accurate because you can actually see the person, you can see what they're doing. It's far more safe, accurate, and reliable than a signature on a piece of paper, than an observation checklist that's been ticked by somebody that we think is the assessor. Videos are great. You can use audio. So instead of giving someone a written exam, if you're not testing their writing skills, why not just crack open your microphone on your phone and ask them questions? Okay, granted, it might not be them answering. Same kind of concept. Audio. You can use written work. You can use photographs. You can use Word, PowerPoint, Excel. You can use past papers. You can use clocking and signing reports. Anything can be used as a portfolio of evidence to demonstrate someone's performance. And this is very important. It's not a portfolio and something, because and something is creating the portfolio. When you are recruiting, you want a portfolio of evidence. Show me what you've done before. Give me your CV. Give me your ID. Give me your previous qualifications. When you are designating, you want a portfolio of evidence. When you are giving CPDs, you want a portfolio of evidence. When you are promoting, portfolio of evidence. Performance reviews require a portfolio of evidence. Everything requires a demonstration of the applied skill of the person or the learner or the recruitee or the application or whoever. So that's the context. So we have head, heart, hands. We have diagnostic, formative, summative, post. And those all together help you create the tools that become your portfolio of evidence. And I'll explain in the ecosystem why this is so important. Because in the ecosystem, you have eAssessment, which is driving the process. And all of those players across all those tools, and people have to use those tools, have to be upskilled. So in the ecosystem, there are two key criteria. We have the assessment process, and we have the actual ecosystem, which I'm going to dive into more detail now, in a lot more detail. Now, whether you're doing any form of assessment. So whether it be recruitment, performance management, internal mobility, learning, CETAs, QCTO, CPD, these 4 steps on the process are all linked. They all kind of fall into it, maybe with just different names and titles. Okay, so let's look at the process. So the process here, which I'll go into in a moment, there's 4 steps. There's a start phase, assessment phase, moderation phase, and a certification phase. So that assessment phase could also be the working phase, the creating of it's because I'll show it now. The moderation could be where HR signs off in performance reviews, to submit it to CEO for final, results. Everything fits into the process somewhere. So let's look at the start, points 1 to 3. So what happens at the start phase is the user, I'm going to talk from a learning and development perspective now. You can assign it to the other areas. So the user registers. They register to attend your program. They register to attend your short course or your skills program or your induction, or they register. Now, the registration has a form of assessment in and of itself because the learner's got to read what's going on and supply the evidence that's required in the registration. I want a CV, I want an ID, I want this enrollment form signed by your CEO. There's a criteria which is assessed by an administrator. From the registration, we then go into a pre-assessment meeting. And this is where the learner goes, I know what I'm being assessed against. I know the unit standards or the QCTO standards. I know what the outcomes are. I know the appeals procedure. I know, all that criteria. That's a pre-assessment meeting. Okay, it's where you sign your declarations. So the learner are conducting a self-assessment on themselves. They're going, do I know what I'm doing? Yes. The assessor and the other players in the room, which I'll talk about when I get to the actual ecosystem, they are checking whether the learner can actually deliver on what they are attesting to. From the pre-assessment meeting, we go into the learning journey. And this is where your e-learning, your virtual learning, your blended learning, your self-directed learning, your classroom-based learning, this is where the learning takes place. And very important at this place, it's your formative assessments that are mostly taking place at this point. If you want to do RPL diagnostic, you probably want to do it straight off. The learner, as you can see in point 2A, doesn't go into the learning journey. An RPL candidate does the pre-assessment meeting like a normal learner would, and then they hop into the RPL space, where they simply just build a portfolio. So your RPL candidate skips the formative assessment requirements and dips straight into the summative assessments. So this is the start of the process. Now, this training learning journey could be a year. It could be a cyclical as well. It could be module 1, module 2, module 3, module 4. It doesn't necessarily mean quick because it fits into the first area of the assessment process. But it's where the learner is building a portfolio of evidence. It could be workplace experience, and it's where they're doing mostly the formative assessments. Okay. When you go to area 2, so coming out of the RPL candidates and the live training candidates, they then create and submit a portfolio of evidence. So where they're collecting the evidence during the training and the RPL initiative, when we get into the assessment phase, they pull the portfolio together, they read how they must put it together, and they submit that portfolio of evidence for assessment. Now, either the assessment finds the learner competent or not yet competent. If they're not yet competent, there's remedial action, and that's where the learner would double back to the training scenario for coaching or mentorship or training or assistance in building the portfolio that the assessor found not yet competent. If they are found competent, the assessor then basically signs them off as competent, or if the assessor is not going to assess again, if it's finished, they'll sign them off as not competent, because they're no longer not yet competent, because at this point, the assessor is going to have to, I'm not assessing you again, you have no other choice, you're done. Once this takes place, this assessment has taken place, the learner is found competent. This is kind of the trigger at this point towards the ASA or the FISA registration, and then the assessment at the ASA or the FISA repeats itself. So it's kind of the same process. There's a portfolio, the learner does a task, builds a portfolio, submits a portfolio, gets assessed, and then they are found as to have passed or failed. Okay? Now, that's the second step of the process. The third step of the process is the internal moderation. So this is the person that takes the batch of learners and takes 25% and reviews the assessment applied on 25% of the learners on the batch to make sure that the principles of assessment were achieved. Principles of assessment are: was the assessment valid? Was it fair? Was it authentic? Was the evidence authentic? Was the evidence sufficient? You know, it's your VAX analysis. Was it current? And your internal moderator either upholds or overturns the assessment. If they uphold the assessment, you move on. If they overturn, it goes back to the assessment phase. And if it's because the assessor didn't assess fairly, the assessor can update. Maybe the learner didn't give enough evidence, and it goes right back to the beginning again. So this is kind of step 6 on the assessment process. Step 7 then is your external verification. So it's either the CTIS external verifier comes in, verifies the internal moderation and agrees or disagrees, or the QCTO does a verification on the ASA. They review 25% of the learners who were in the batch in FISA or the ASA, and either way it ends with an awarded certificate, credit, qualification, designation, CPD, should the learners be found competent all the way through. So those are the 4 steps in the process. What I'd like you to notice in these 4 steps is the color code, because I'm going to go into the ecosystem now. So the starting step is red, the second step is blue, which is the assessment side, moderation is green, certification is purple. Okay, 4 steps. Now, let's look at the system. Okay, so this is the digital assessment ecosystem. This is not the digital learning ecosystem, the assessment ecosystem. And it's this very complicated. No, it's complex. Not so complicated, it's complex. You will note the colors: red, blue, green, purple. It's there for a reason. And let's start the process. So what I want you to focus on as you go is the roles. So the first role is the role of the learner. Okay? The learner follows the assessment process through the pre-assessment meeting, the portfolio build, the remedial, if necessary, internal moderation, and external verification. So this is the first part of the process. Now, in terms of upskilling, we upskill our learners on how to use tech, how to fill out forms. So we spend a lot of time with our learners on understanding the technologies and the digitization that's required for each step in the process as the end user. So in the pre-assessment, now the key role players who are involved in the pre-assessment is the learner. Then you've got your company administrator. They're very involved in this process because they are busy checking that the evidence is there, that the CVs and IDs are certified, they're loading them into the correct document classes or areas within the technology. So your administrator is very much governing the learner. They're checking that the learner is actually at the pre-assessment meeting. You've got your primary assessor who's also at the pre-assessment meeting, well, or should be, because they are the people that are going to assess the learner. Now, this is very interesting because if the pre-assessment meeting, that it's at the pre-assessment meeting that the learner is giving you the thumbs up to be assessed. So if your facilitator is conducting assessment of the learner and the pre-assessment meeting is not done, that's one, a breach of copy, because the learner has not given you the right to conduct the assessment on them. They have not agreed to it. So if it's done at the end of training, that is a, that, and two, that opens up huge area for appeal, because the learner can find things unfair because they weren't given their rights. So it's very important that the pre-assessment meeting happens prior to RPL or learning taking place. Now, in this process, we have come to learn that the facilitator is a very important part in the pre-assessment meeting, because generally the pre-assessment meetings are moving to a Zoom Teams online platform. The assessor is not always there, so the facilitator is required to take the learners through the pre-assessment meeting, which is totally fine. But if the facilitator doesn't understand the assessment process or how to use the technology required to take the person through the pre-assessment meeting, it fails every time. At the pre-assessment meeting as well, you have the opportunity for the learners to give you the 100% updated, deep personal details, especially if you're using the right technology or the right platforms. And then you have the most up-to-date information of the learner. So if the administrator captured the details wrong, by mistake, or whoever captured them, the learner now logs on and they can make changes to their own personal details so that you have the latest and up-to-date information. So that's the roles in the pre-assessment meeting. Now, if we go to the second, which is the POE and remedial, there are a few more roles. So you have a learner, great, they're building the portfolio, they're there, they're growing, they're learning. You have the primary assessor, person who's signing the learner off. Now there's a new role of an evidence collector. This is somebody who's helping the learner collect evidence. It could be a supervisor, a manager, a friend, a colleague. There's people who help them collect the information. The facilitator is very involved at this pace because they are busy giving content, they're giving feedback. During the training, there's a lot of formative assessment going on. They are providing context. You've got your administrator, still very involved to check that the portfolios are coming in, the formatives are coming in. Now you've got your tech support. Now, this is a very important role because the technology that you choose to use should have a tech support for your learners and for your company role players. And this is why you probably need a contact center. Now, as I said earlier, big tech, all the technology companies that are offering services have a contact center of some kind, whether it be inbound or outbound, it's there. Now, your contact center is there so that if the learners are struggling with the tech, or if they're struggling with the content, they are engaged with in one way or another, and they are able to be pushed into the right direction. Because when the facilitator is out the classroom and the learner is driving through tech on their own, they need this support. It's become a vital part of this ecosystem. If you're not offering some kind of a contact center, you're disadvantaging the learner unnecessarily. The tech support is people that can help the learners chase bugs, if things are not going right, if the page collapses, if you can't find the portfolio, if the link doesn't work, that's a tech support who kicks in to support. The tech support also supports the facilitator, the administrator, the assessor on how to read the reports, how to assess using the technology, how to check that the learner, the work is done, how to follow up with the different assessment criteria. It's very, very important that these roles are also engaged with. I'll show you how in a moment. Then we move to internal moderation. Now, internal moderation is no longer just an internal moderator arriving at your premises with a whole bunch of portfolios lying on a table. And because they've done it all the time, they know what to do. We're moving into a new era of digital assessment. So the internal moderators need the support. That's why when it goes into internal moderation, it's your administrator again, who's requested the internal moderator. And then you need the internal moderator and the assessor. Because in the technology, this is all online now, it's moving online. The internal moderator can now access the assessor quite simply. So a WhatsApp group is a very good example there if you don't use other type of communication tech. Now you also still need the tech support because now the tech support is supporting the internal moderator and the administrator. The internal moderator can request information from the assessor based on the assessment. And this happens at the internal moderation phase. And these are the roles that are required at this phase in the digital ecosystem. When we move to exit verification, again, now we have the administrator again who requested the exit verification. But you also now have the exit verifier. Now, this is very intriguing. What we are experiencing is quite amazing. So more and more CETAs are accepting an e-portfolio technology. They're saying, yes, you can use it. And we're getting it in writing and we're getting the, okay, you can go for it. And yet, last week we had 4 exit moderators go, exit verifiers go, we will not log on. You see, the shift is so big. The fear is so big of using technology. And because it's been done so poorly in the past and people don't understand the transition and the digital ecosystems required, it's very difficult and confusing to use. And that's why the exit verifier also needs access to the internal moderator and assessor via the same WhatsApp group, but they also need tech support. So from the time they get told that they're on it to the time they wrap up, the tech support is there. They get their own logins if necessary. They get the tech support is there as they work through the internal moderation or the exit verification. But this is very important. It's the same with the QCTO and the FEASes and the ACEs. The learner gets the statement of achievement from the training provider, and they go for the FEAS or the ACER. That FEAS or ACER, if it's digital, has the same assessment ecosystem. And they've got to move through. And then the QCTO, their verifier, needs the same support. So these are the roles at the different parts of the process of assessment who engage at different times within the ecosystem. Right. It's a lot more than what people think of. Now, the next side we will look at is the tech in an ecosystem. So let's go back to the pre-assessment meeting with the learner roles. You need two types of softwares. You need an application software or a registration software of some kind. You can use chatbots, you can use forms, you can use paper-based and email. But now you also need to start at this point engaging with, in my case, P4P, and eAssessment or ePortfolio platform of some kind. The e-learning, LMS, LXP at this point is not entirely necessary unless you're using it as on the whole process. But when the learner does this, this is where they are starting to build their portfolio with the legislative requirement documents, CV, ID, previous qualification, medical certificates, any other enrollment forms, learnership agreements, contracts. This is happening at this point in time and being created into the folder. And a good e-assessment technology will give for each learner all this information in one place. So you don't need to use Dropbox and Teams and SharePoint and for your e-assessment. You need one document that covers everything within the Poppy space. So, that's a whole different discussion. So for the pre-assessment meeting, you've got your role players and this type of software. Now, for the second one, now this is crazy. This is now where the learning and the assessment is taking place. And now we start using LMSs and MOOCs and LXPs and Weibo coding and videos, images, PowerPoint, Excel, PDF, Word. We're using all this different way to offer blended learning. They've got some incredible good VR. I know Adi is talking at this conference tomorrow from Boiler Room, and he does a lot of VR. It's fantastic and exciting what's going on in the world of learning. However, in all that learning, it's the assessment that we are sending people into the workplace based on, not based on how cool the learning experience was. So consider this. The assessor is signing the learner off as competent. The assessor is saying that this learner can do the job. Now, if that learner is coming to work for you, would you hire them based on what the assessor has signed off? Or have you just forced the assessor to tick all the boxes to get them through, to get the grants back, to get the levies and all that kind of stuff, or to satisfy your clients? Because this is what you are putting into the workplace with someone who can or maybe cannot do the job. So this is the different types of technology that can be used. There are so much out there. Anything on the web can be used at this point. This also helps build the portfolio of evidence, and it also helps with the assessment criteria of the learner. At this point, it's why you really need an e-assessment platform, because as the learner is working through your e-learning platform and they're doing the learning, creating the notional hours and doing the formative onlines and doing the classroom-based in the breakaway rooms on Zoom and Teams, and all of that is creating evidence. That evidence must be stored. That storage should be in an e-portfolio platform. When it's in an e-learning or LXP platform, it's starting to move out of the peer requirements as to who can access it, when can they access it, how long can they access it for, and all the information that breaks down. So this is very important in terms of the tech required at EPOE, build, and remedial phases. Okay, When we deal with internal moderation, the different technology now require is your e-portfolio platform. And this is where it gets very interesting, because instead of having your learners store their portfolios in a Google Drive or OneDrive, and then they store their videos in this folder, and then they store their legislative requirements in that folder, and then your administrator is juggling folders because of popular reasons, and the assessor can't have access to this, and the moderator can't see that, and the learner can't. You need an e-portfolio platform. E-learning and LXP systems are not built for assessment. They're built for learning. So yes, you can drop your folders into specific places in those technologies, but those are not governed on the assessment space. They also then don't have the ecosystem to support the criteria. So make sure you select a good e-assessment, e-portfolio partner. You need reporting systems, and you need a communication system when it comes to the internal moderation, so that the internal moderator has access to the learners and to the assessors and to the portfolios of evidence and the administrators at the same time, even though they are internally moderating online or even at your workplace. Because if they come in and you have all the portfolios laid out all over the table, that internal moderator should actually still have access to that learner if they need to ask them questions. Again, because with our technology, a lot of corners have been cut and people just don't know what to do, so they do nothing. And so precedents get set. So it doesn't mean that what's being done is right or in line with legislation or policies. It means it's being done because it hasn't really been able to be solved before. Now that we can solve it, people aren't quite sure what to do with the solution, because it's starting to show up the level of competence at all levels in the ecosystem. So this is for the internal moderator, the systems that are required. And when you go to your external verifier, you also need your e-platform, because this is important that the external verifier has access to everything that they need, a reporting system and a communication system as well, because the verifier needs access to the internal moderator, assessor, administrator, company. They need all the company docs as well as all the learner docs. They need everything assigned into a simple logical space. And then they obviously need the reports as well. So this is the ecosystem that's required to successfully roll out digital assessment. Now, where it rolls out quite simply is you start off with the learner. So you build for the learner, the end in sight, always for the end. Then you go through into the second phase, the pre-assessment meeting, and you apply what you've built to the learner in the pre-assessment meeting. Now, as much as you upskill the learner before they get to the pre-assessment meeting, you need to upskill all the different role players on how to behave in the pre-assessment meeting, what they must do, what their roles are, what's required of them, how do they use the tech before the learner gets in. And so with the tech on the outer rim, you provide the tech to the role players. You teach the role players how to do it in the pre-assessment meeting. Then you bring the learners on, and as you upskill the learners in the pre-assessment meeting, the roles and the role players are waiting and they know what to do. And yes, this takes time, because unless you are using those technologies every day, you forget how to use them. We see this often. We have assessors who are brilliant. They get all the way through and then they forget to close a learner off because they haven't used the technology in 3 months or 2 months. When you get to the e-learning and the portfolio build phase, you've got a lot more technology that you assume the role players know how to use and what their role is in using that technology. So what you need to do is, once you've designed your program on your e-learning LMS platform or in Word, Excel, PowerPoint, or choosing chatbots or whatever it is, you need to bring in your role players before your learners. Teach them all the skills. Teach them how to use it. So the old train the trainer methodology is just incredibly powerful, where before you become the trainer, you are the learner. So you get the trainer to be the learner in the learning content, to build the portfolio the way the learner will build it. So I give an example. In P4P, when we bring clients on and we bring their programs on, we get the clients to sign off the assessment criteria in our technology, in a user acceptance testing part of the technology. It's not live, it's UAT. And when we do that, because they are signing off every point, they are playing the role of the assessor because they are assigned in the role of the learner. So every one of our clients are experiencing what their learners are going to experience on the assessment side, and then decide if the assessment is created correctly or not, or if they want to make a change. And this is what you've got to do. Not take this for granted, because just because you provide the person Zoom or Teams doesn't mean they know how to use it, or use breakaway rooms. They don't. You've got to make sure that they use it according to your standard. And then when the learner comes on, once you've moved your way in and the learner comes on, they are just applying what they already know, and they already have that experience. Internal moderation is the same. You've got all these great tools out there, but if you don't teach the internal moderator how to use your tools, just because they moderate for 10 other people, do not think that they're going to know how to use your tool. You've got to show them how, and this takes time for both you and them, but it's time well invested, because if you don't do that, then things get missed, things get mixed up, things get broken, things get forgotten. So, and remember, often the technologies have a lot more to offer than what different people need. So your administrators need to be totally fluent with the whole technology cycle. But your pre-assessment meetings people only need to understand pre-assessment meeting stuff. Your internal moderator only needs to understand the internal moderator stuff. The learning, it's just that process, and everybody's got to understand different amounts of information. The learners just need what they need. The assessors need what they need. But the assessors need to understand what the learner's stuff looks like, because while they're assessing, they can then support the learner, the coaches, the mentors, the facilitators. The exit verifiers are the big interesting one at the moment, in my world at least, because as much as I said we are getting traction with the seaters, the exit verifiers are not accepting offers on how to learn to use different systems. They're not accepting offers on, and this is only my experience, and I'm talking about, it's about 8 or 9 verifiers now across 6 different seaters. They're not taking on the opportunity for us to engage with them, and therefore they're struggling. The 3 verifiers that have taken on, the opportunity to learn, they've nailed it. They've done so well. They've given really good feedback. We've been able to update systems, which is what technology is about. There's no perfect technology system out there, and definitely no one end-to-end. It doesn't exist. The technologies have to talk to each other, and only by internal moderators using it and learners using it and assessors using it will you understand how the end user consumes your technology and the way you do things. And once you understand that, you can alter the tech or the learning or the support in the way that's necessary. So that's the digital ecosystem. Welcome to the digital ecosystem. Remember, it's governed by a process and a grouping of components or people to make the system work well. So, any Q&A, please feel free to give me a shout. You can scan this QR code, or you can go to the webpage to actually download the full 26-page paper, which goes into far more detail in this discussion. Good luck on going digital. My advice, if you want to start with the assessment and then move to the learning content, because the learning content is far bigger, far more work, far more costly. People are interested, seaters, governing bodies, professional bodies are interested in the assessment of the learning, they're interested in the portfolio of evidence. So it's a really good place to start, learn how the process works from an assessment perspective, and then build your e-learning content on top of the assessment. When you do it the other way, it becomes far more tricky, because you have to update your e-learning anyway, linking it to your e-assessment. And you got to juggle more balls. But there's no right or wrong way. You've got to do what works for you. And I look forward to the Q&A session. Thank you.